With regards to scaling a fish, scaling is one of those techniques that usually involves what I like to call a bear trap on a stick. It's a big claw usually with big teeth. You can get scalers with big teeth or very fine ones. And so to go along and work with a lot of strength to get scales off, especially off a fish something of this size, requires a lot of force, and eventually it damages the flesh. And if you've got the intent to store this fish beyond day one, then that bruising that occurs through scaling is only going to get worse, and it's going to prove to create a more soft flesh than it once was. So the way to combat that, I suppose, is a technique that I picked up through just watching other chefs do. And the Japanese chefs that worked at Fish Face when I was there, they were trained in edamame cuisine, Tokyo cuisine, and they basically cut the scales off the fish that they were using for sushi and sashimi. And the reason they do that is just so that they can control the texture of the fish. Because if they can control the softness or the firmness of their fish against the tender grains of rice that it might be sitting on, then you're creating layers of detail which you experience in your mouth when you're eating something so small. You want all the details to be perfect. So I asked them at the time, do you do this to all fish? Do you scale your fish like this for the fish that we pan fry, that we serve in salads and things like that? And I got a quick answer of no, that's ridiculous. It's only used for sushi and sashimi. And I thought, fair enough, that's fine. So I needed to investigate that myself and watch, because they were never going to teach me. So I patiently watched them do it for about 12 months, and then I gave myself a go at it, and obviously butchered a few fish, put a few holes in the side, and it really does take quite a long time to work out that skill of getting between the scale and the actual skin of the fish. A lot of times people see me do this, and what it looks like is I'm cutting the skin of the fish off, but what we're actually doing is we're cutting the scale off. And by cutting the scale off, we're cutting moisture off the fish. If you can imagine the scales laying flat on a fish, and then we go along with a scaler and we rip up, then basically the pockets that the scales sit within raise up, scale spits out, and then you've got an open pocket where the scale used to sit, left behind. So once the fish is scaled completely, the pockets are open, the pockets are quite deep, then a hose basically washes away all the scales, and you dip it in water, washed fish. And so from there, the gesture of a chef, I suppose, is to take a cloth and then wipe the fish off going this way. And so you're combing down, the little pocket, you're combing flat. So what you've got now is water sitting in that pocket, and then water that sits there through time inevitably creates this fishy fish smell. And so fishy fish, to me, and I know this is a lot of chat, but this is the core of what I do. It's if we can remove the moisture, the water, contact from a fish in the very beginning, then you've got a realm of opportunity that exists outside of that. So critical that all these steps happen in the very beginning. To process this now, we cut the scales off. By cutting off, you can actually see the way that the scales sit. And I'll get this first part off just so that we can have a close look. And you can see there's some scale on the knife because this is a very big fish. And so some of them come off like that, but then majoritively we've gone along, we've cut the scales off like this. And this basically gives us the opportunity to have a look at how a scale actually sits on a fish, and it sort of brings meaning to why I'm saying about this little pocket that they sit in. You can see almost like it's honeycomb webbing within. Once the scale flicks out, this little pocket here fills with water, and then the water itself sits on the skin of the fish, and then eventually in time that water deteriorates the actual fish itself. So basically when the scales come off, in this form, what we can do is these scales we can boil in water, and you can see how easily they come out, they just fall out. But what we do is we put all of these scales into a pot of water, and by bringing that pot to the boil, what happens is all the scales, all the heavy scale basically sinks to the bottom of the pan, and then the membrane will float to the top. You skim off the membrane and take that and discard, but then the actual scale itself, strain the water off and then repeat with the cold water back up to a boil 3 times. And then at the end of that process, you can take those scales, dry them out, and then deep fry them, and then season them with whatever seasoning tickles your fancy, basically. A mixture of pepper and fennel is delicious. Using vinegar powder is another fantastic way of using them, so that you can do salt and vinegar scales, which we've done here at the restaurant. And then the other way that you can do it is on the 3rd boil, you can change it from just being cold water to doing 50-50 sugar and water, so that you can actually add sugar to the scale, dry them out, and then deep fry them. And then what you end up with is something that is caramelized, and it's a sugared fish scale. And we use that on a garnish for a chocolate dessert that we do here at the restaurant as well. There is method behind the madness in terms of using the scale. In terms of its nutritional benefits, I couldn't tell you that it's overly good for you if it's deep fried, but it adds texture to a dish where otherwise you may have purchased a nut or something crisp to go with it. So a way of using up one small part of the fish.